Good morning, it's Wednesday the 25th of October in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Israel demands that the head of the United Nations resigns over comments he made about the Hamas attack. Deutsche Bank warns of more cost cuts but promises to pay out more to shareholders, while Santander and Lloyds report a beat in expected profits. And the UK is scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Israel's ambassador to the United States has called on the head of the UN to resign. The demand came after Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' speech at a Security Council meeting to discuss the Israel-Hamas war. Here are the key moments from that address.
I have condemned unequivocally the horrifying and unprecedented 7 October acts of terror by Hamas in Israel. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets. It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people.
Antonio Guterres' remarks led the Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen to cancel a meeting with the UN Secretary-General. The country's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan accused Guterres of downplaying the Hamas attacks.
The UN is failing, and you, Mr. Secretary-General, have lost all morality and impartiality. When you say those terrible words that these heinous attacks did not happen in a vacuum, you are tolerating terrorism.
Gilad Erdan's response highlights the growing diplomatic tensions following the Hamas attacks on Israel, which killed about 1,400 people. Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry says retaliatory airstrikes have killed more than 5,000 there. Turning now to some of today's corporate earnings, Deutsche Bank plans to accelerate payouts to shareholders after higher income from its corporate bank and deposit inflows offset weaker trading results in the third quarter. Revenue in the 3 months to the end of September rose by about 3% from a year earlier to €7.13 billion, in line with analyst estimates. Speaking to Bloomberg, the lender's CFO, James Van Mulke, said it had more work to do on operating costs.
Yes, more coming. We're going to continue to work with discipline on the cost base. We've laid out to investors a goal to run the company essentially flat for a considerable period of time. And what that means is that we're working sort of every day on cost reduction measures, which at the very least should offset the impact of inflation and also allow us to invest in the businesses with our own resources.
James Van Mulke's comments came after the bank vowed to increase revenue while keeping costs in check. Deutsche Bank's CFO, Christian Saving, has pledged to return €8 billion to shareholders over 5 years. Shares in Deutsche Bank at the open up 5.5%. Lloyds has set aside less than expected for troubled loans in the third quarter and says households are coping well with higher interest rates. The news helped the bank beat earnings expectations for the period and maintain its outlook for the year. Pre-tax profit jumped to an above estimate £1.86 billion for the quarter, while its net interest margin was 3.08%. Lloyds shares down 1.2% at the open. Santander Earnings beat out estimates as higher interest rates in Europe and Mexico continued to boost revenue and offset a rise in loan loss charges. CFO Jose Garcia Cantera had a positive outlook.
We have delivered another very strong set of results, adding 9 million customers in the first 9 months of the year, growing revenue at double digits and improving efficiency as a result of our transformation program. We have earned 2.9 billion in the quarter, 8.1 in the first 9 months of the year. Both are record figures for Santander.
Although Santander's profit came in €110 million higher than analysts had expected, the provisions for loan losses were up by a fifth compared to last year. The results come just one day after another one of Europe's big lenders, Barclays, lowered its forecast for lending profitability, leading to a slump in the British bank's share price. The UK is scrapping its cap on banker bonuses, enforcing plans unveiled by Liz Truss's government last year. The cap limiting bonuses to a maximum of twice a banker's base pay will be lifted at the end of the month. The Prudential Regulation Authority says banks will be able to pay staff as they like for the current financial year. Financial firms now face the challenge of how to cut elevated fixed pay to rebalance compensation packages. To US politics, and Trump ally Mike Johnson is the latest Republican to attempt to be the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. The Louisiana representative is the fourth nominee in 3 weeks as Republican infighting leaves the legislative chamber rudderless. He promised this time will be different.
You're going to see this group working like a well-oiled machine.
Johnson's nomination comes after former President Donald Trump torpedoed the previous candidate's chances yesterday. Mike Johnson was involved directly in the campaign to invalidate the 2020 presidential election results, making moderate support difficult when he faces a House vote later today. And the Chinese property developer Country Garden has defaulted on a dollar bond for the first time. The company's fall into distress underlines the severe crisis in the property sector. The firm is now likely headed for what would be one of the country's biggest ever restructurings. Construction broadly accounts for about 20% of GDP in the world's second largest economy. Well, let's get the latest on the situation in the Middle East now and those tense exchanges at the UN Security Council last night. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations calling for the resignation of Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. This as the UN's aid agency in Gaza says it will run out of fuel by the end of today. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook has the latest for us from Tel Aviv this morning. Good morning to you, Oliver. What happened at the UN Security Council last night?
Yeah, that's right, Stephen. So, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres was pointing to what he called clear violations of international humanitarian law on the part of Israel in Gaza. And I'll quote here just so we have everything in context. He said that the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas. He also said, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. However, what he also said is it is important to recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum, adding that the Palestinians have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. This was obviously not at all well received by the Israelis. The Israeli foreign minister canceled a meeting with Guterres. The Israeli ambassador for the United Nations demanded Guterres resigns. He said the speech was shocking, and it proved, he said, quote, conclusively beyond any doubt that the Secretary General is completely disconnected from the reality in our region. He said that it expressed an understanding for terrorism and murder. And of course, the step back here is that, Israel's stated objective is to dismantle Hamas, which is not, after October the 7th, an acceptable regime and entity that can be bordering with Israel. And of course, Hamas is still attacking and bombing Israel. Of course, the main offensive is by the Israelis in Gaza, but it's still going in the other direction. The Israelis, from the beginning, have said they are not targeting civilians. They're making every effort to preserve human lives, but they're fighting, they say, an enemy that deliberately disguises itself in the civilian population. The meaningful point here, though, is that the death toll, according to the authorities, there has exceeded 5,000 people, and most of those people are civilians. And this brings into the question of self-defense. Most nations have affirmed Israel's right to self-defense. The question is, where is the line? And different nations will have different answers to that question. Even the United States has said that it's important how Israel goes about this. And of course, we've heard echoes from the Arab world who have said that the message they're getting from the West and Israelis is that Palestinian lives matter less.
Yeah, and this is a time, of course, that we're watching the very small number of trucks carrying aid being allowed into Gaza as well. What progress is being made on getting more aid into Gaza? We've had this warning from the UN agency there too.
So this was a part of the conversation that there was with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and Joe Biden overnight. Again, this has been a very tense relationship through the tenure of Biden's administration. One of the things that they talked about was aid, and it seemed yesterday that the number of trucks really fell significantly. Already, it wasn't getting to the numbers that the UN said that they needed to get to make a meaningful dent in the humanitarian situation in Gaza, but really yesterday was really not good in that regard. And Biden himself has said that the aid is moving too slowly. Blinken has said that he's in favor of humanitarian pauses to get more aid in. But again, one of the sticking points here is fuel, is the question of fuel. The Israelis are opposed to getting fuel in there. Obviously, fuel is required for the running of, most things, including military operations by Hamas, which is why, there is a sticking point on that. The UN agency within Gaza is saying that they're going to run out of fuel today and will not be able to disperse those goods if they do not get more.
On the diplomatic front, Oliver, we had Emmanuel Macron, the French president, in Israel yesterday and in the West Bank meeting, Mahmoud Abbas as well. What more should we be expecting in terms of those meetings? You mentioned the conversation also between Joe Biden and Mohammed bin Salman.
Yeah, so again, these conversations are focusing on a great many issues. Hostages is going to be another one. I mean, Macron's message was similar to many of the other Western leaders, which is solidarity with Israel. He said that Israel has the right to fight terrorism without mercy, but not without rules. And again, this speaks to the fine line that many of these leaders are walking. He called for a coalition to fight against Hamas and, organizations like it, which he calls, Islamic State as among those. But again, trying to work to free hostages. And he's also saying, when he went to Ramallah afterwards, he met with Mahmoud Abbas, who presides over the the West Bank, that nothing can justify the suffering of the civilians in Gaza. So again, there's a lot of discussion over this, and this is evolving. And I think what was interesting about Macron, a number of people evoked this, but Macron perhaps a bit more prominently than some of the other Western leaders was talking about longer-term solutions, saying that the Palestinians have a right to a state, and again, invoking that the two-state solution, words that are more easily spoken than obviously achieved.
Okay, Oliver Crook in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining us with the latest on that story. Let's turn to some of the latest bank earnings now, and the Spanish lender Santander reporting $3.1 billion of profit in the third quarter, above forecast. The CFO, Jose Garcia Cantera, has been speaking to Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta.
We have delivered another very strong set of results, adding 9 million customers in the first 9 months of the year, growing revenue at double digits and improving efficiency as a result of our transformation program. We have earned 2.9 billion in the quarter, 8.1 in the first 9 months of the year. Both are record figures for Santander. This is equivalent to a return on tangible equity of 14.8%. We've grown TNAV plus dividend per share at 12% in the first 9 months of the year, while we have strengthened our capital to 12.3%. So very good set of results. Basically, the key variable that explains these results is our diversification. We have very good performance in Europe, improving profitability in all countries, and we are starting to see the benefits of lower rates in Latin America.
Well, they certainly are very crucial numbers. And before I want to kind of move on to the different pieces of your business, I want to ask you first about your loan loss provisions, because to me, those were actually a little bit higher than the market was expecting. An estimate about 3.1 billion, we'll call it, where you actually reported about 3.3 billion in loan loss provisions. How much of that is a result of the macroeconomic take out of Santander?
We expected, we had guided the market for a cost of risk to below 1.2%. We are at 1.13 in September, so we are very much in line, actually better than our estimates for the year. And we think we will end better than this 1.2% by December. Obviously, we have some normalization of the cost of risk in some economies as interest rates go up, but we are starting to see actually much better performance, and the outlook is improving in countries where interest rates are coming down, like in Brazil. So overall, I think we are very pleased with our asset quality evolution. The key variable to estimate future asset quality is the strength of the labor markets. And labor markets are very, very strong in all the economies where we operate. So we don't see deterioration in asset quality in the coming quarters.
It all sounds great on the surface. I want to dive into the Brazil conversation in just a moment, but those provisions are up by about a fifth. Tell me where those spots of distress might actually be.
Well, the increase is coming in the U.S. as the economy as our business in the U.S. is normalizing. Our provisions for our auto business in the U.S. Are very seasonal. So they usually are low in the first half of the year. They tend to go up in the second half of the year, and they are gradually normalizing. We believe, though, that the change in our business mix will lead to significantly lower provisions than what we had on a pre-pandemic levels. In Europe, we are seeing a bit higher provisions in the UK, coming from very, very low levels. Actually, a reversal of provisions last year, but asset quality and provisions are improving in Spain, are improving in Brazil, very much flat in Mexico. So overall, as I said, very, very much in line with our expectations.
Well, let's go then to the Brazilian story as well. Of course, we know that that is one of your largest markets for Santander. Talk to us a little bit about the risks in Brazil at a time when the Brazilian economy specifically is coming under quite a bit of pressure. Interest rates, commodity pressures, cost of living as well. Where is the read-through into your bottom line?
When interest rates started to go up, we tightened our credit standards. So we went into this period with significantly more prudent policies. We have seen that in the sense that we've been growing a bit less. This is a country with very low banking penetration, and we've been growing our loan portfolio at just single digits in the last couple of years. But interest rates have already started to go down. They have gone down already 100 basis points from 13.75 to 12.75, and we would expect them to continue to come down at least 100 basis points more before the year end, and maybe 200 to 250 next year. Lower rates actually helps in terms of volumes, and we would expect to recover double-digit growth next year, and also in terms of asset quality. And we had an increase in asset quality, obviously, as interest rates were in asset quality deterioration, an increase in the cost of risk as interest rates went up. But now that they have come down, we have seen an improvement. So we are very confident that our profitability in Brazil will turn around and start improving significantly next year from 2023.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond. Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa device. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.